All right, what's up, students? I'm going to be lecturing over content from Chapter 8 today from the Alan Brinkley textbook. Okay, so Chapter 8, Varieties of American Nationalism. Okay, so something that's going on during this time is we talked extensively about the first bank of the United States. Well, its charter, which was chartered under Hamilton, is set to expire in 1811. Okay, so we just kind of wrapped up War of 1812. A sort of underlying issue here that's going to need to be dealt with is the Bank of the United States. State banks are issuing notes during this time, and the second bank of the United States is chartered for 20 years in 1816. I'll make some comments about that in a moment. There's some economic issues following the War of 1812. Great Britain is flooding United States markets with goods, again, hurting the American economy, and there's a need for tariffs. There's a tariff in 1816, which is designed to protect American industry. It's created. James Monroe serves as the fifth president of the United States. He is elected in 1816, served from 1817 through 1825. And he is the last of the presidents from the Virginia dynasty. Okay. Now, the Virginia dynasty is this idea that four of the first five presidents, and I believe seven total, if I'm not mistaken, all came from Virginia. Okay. So four of the first five presidents, all from Virginia. Okay. The last of those is James Monroe. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, all from Virginia. Okay. John Adams, not from Virginia. Rufus King ran against Monroe as a Federalist. He was defeated. Monroe chooses John Quincy Adams as his Secretary of State, which essentially means that this will likely be his main successor. Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe had all been Secretary of States to a president previously, so it's kind of the tradition. John Quincy Adams will go on to be the sixth president of the United States later. We'll talk about that. Monroe was not very bright or a great leader. He's the last of this founding fathers generation, and he ushers in what's known as the era of good feelings. This is an era where political parties are not super strong. This era of good feelings originated when Monroe completed a goodwill tour throughout the United States, and this led to a huge increase in nationalism. There's really only one political party during this time, the Democratic Republicans, and that is another reason why it is referred to as the era of good feelings. You don't have all this factionalized arguing, etc. There was a Seminole War in Florida. Okay, so Andrew Jackson invades Florida, pushing Native Americans back into the state. Now, Florida is very interesting in terms of sort of issues with the border. You remember we talked about the Warhawks and the War of 1812, or leading into the War of 1812, 1810 elections. They had two areas that they were worried about: Spanish Florida, and then also Canada. Okay. Now, part of the issue of Spanish Florida, if you remember the Red Sticks that rose up, and Andrew Jackson just essentially annihilated them in the Creek War, Central Alabama at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. But they had been collaborating with the Spanish in Florida. Also, if you go back a little further in American history, you look at colonial era, or you look at when colonies are first getting established, some of the first colonies. Georgia was set up as this unique sort of buffer zone between South Carolina and Florida, right? And that was because of, even at that time, raids that were taking place across the border. And just an interesting little sort of border dispute, and then it got tied up in the War of 1812, and then Andrew Jackson is dealing with this just a few years later. Okay, so the Seminole War in Florida, interesting, and one of the repercussions of this issue is the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. This is between the United States and Spain. And it says that the United States would get Florida in exchange for giving up claims that it had to Texas. Okay. And then Spain would give up its claim to the Pacific Northwest. That is the Adams-Onis Treaty. Okay, so there's going to be a panic. The Panic of 1819. This is a financial panic caused by speculation, which is the buying of goods in the hopes of selling it at a higher price in the future, right? Over speculation occurs with land in the United States in 1819. Second Bank of the United States began tightening credit and calling in loans, causing many state banks to fail. Many Americans blamed the Bank of the United States for the Panic of 1819. Okay, now let's get into America's first slavery debate, the Missouri Compromise. Okay, this takes place during the antebellum period. So it's a unique period for you to be thinking about. This is the period before the Civil War. Okay, this is when we start to see sectionalism and also antebellum reform. Right, so the antebellum era is set between the Missouri Compromise and the election of Abraham Lincoln / the secession of South Carolina. This period is characterized by sectionalism, okay? The North, the South, and the West all have their own unique and diverse culture, economy, politics, etc. Issues related to race are really forming and brewing that are still evident today that come up in the antebellum period. Missouri experiences an uncomfortable admission into the United States, and that's what we're going to be getting into. Okay, so the doctrine of equality of states. All right, this is that all states are seen as equal. New states may be, this is a quote, new states may be admitted by Congress into the Union. It says this in the Constitution. Congress decides the conditions by which a state is allowed in. It's all been laid out. Okay. In 1819, Missouri applies for admission into the Union as a slave state. That's the big issue. Okay. And we're going to get into what comes out of this. Okay. Now, there's the Talmadge Amendment. This is a representative from New York. And here is what Talmadge is proposing through the Talmadge Amendment. And provided that the further introduction of slavery or involuntary servitude by prohibited, and that all children born within the state after the admission thereof into the Union shall be free at the age of 25 years. Okay, so this means Missouri will eventually become a free state, that from the time that Missouri is admitted, that there will be an age. Okay, well, people born, after this time, but there's some problems with that. Anyone born in Missouri, born after Missouri comes in the Union, will be free at 25. What about people born 1 week before? Okay, this caused a lot of sort of ethical issues for people. In 1860, New Jersey, for example, still had slaves, but was a free state because of this type of thinking. Okay. The South saw gradual emancipation efforts, however, as the beginning of the end, and they were ardently opposed to this. So this is sort of setting the stage for what the antebellum period is going to be like in the country. Now, parity refers to a balance between free and slave states. And this is an idea that there should be an equal number. Okay. And this will be the policy throughout the antebellum era from 1820 to 1850. Now, slave states, okay, we have Delaware, Georgia, Maryland, South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi. That's 10. Free states, okay, we have New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. That's 11, okay? So the issue of trajectory here is that it looks like Missouri should be a free state on the map. But when they come in as a slave state, that will make it appear as if slavery is spreading west. And that is the issue, okay? This brings up the issue of whether or not this will be allowed. Okay, now if you think back to the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, slavery is outlawed in the Northwest Territories. Okay, well, here's the real issue: is in 1819, Alabama is admitted into the Union as a slave state with no issues. It's in the South. It's surrounded by slave states, and this makes an equal number of slave states. So when Missouri applies for admission, there would be one more slave state. So that's something that everybody is that is sort of going to make up the abolitionist movement, or is opposed to the spread or perceived or appeared spreading of slavery. This is just a serious issue. Okay. So in Missouri, in relation to what to do here, okay, with the Talmadge Amendment, the Senate passes sort of a compromise without the Talmadge Amendment. The House of Representatives passed it with the Talmadge Amendment. So here we have some early disagreement. Henry Clay, U.S. Senator from Kentucky, he engineers the first of 3 compromises, and he's going to be known as the Great Compromiser for his efforts. He's a legendary political figure. He says, admit Missouri as a slave state. Maine should be admitted as a free state. It had previously been a part of Massachusetts, and parity would have continuity. Okay. Also, prohibit slavery in the territories of the Louisiana Purchase north of the 36-degree and 30-degree parallel. Okay. Most of the Louisiana Purchase territory would become free territory. Arkansas Territory, Missouri Territory, that's a lot of states can be made out of those territories, okay, at this time. It's larger than the states are today. So Missouri is admitted as a slave state, but as an exception. Clay is seen as a hero by many for his efforts, okay? Jefferson's watching all of this happen. Missouri is admitted as a slave state. Maine is admitted as a free state. The 36-30 line is drawn. He's in retirement when this happens, and he has concerns. He figures what this debate is going to do in the future, right? He thinks it's going to intensify. Now, Jefferson is essentially saying that this issue is sort of like a Pandora's box. Okay, you can't just argue about slavery. It's something that's going to be ongoing. It's going to intensify. It's an uncomfortable subject, and it's far from being over. Now, Jefferson thought slavery was on its way out when he was in office and when he was writing the Declaration, if you remember. He believed in gradual emancipation. But he is also saying about this issue is sort of, I'm paraphrasing a quote here, that when you grab a wolf or a dog by the ear, it is vulnerable. But if you let go, it could bite you. It could kill you. If you hold on, you're in this comfortable position. And that's what he sees the United States doing with the question of slavery. Jefferson saw that it took only really one generation, is what he thinks, to lose many of the gains of the Revolution. And he fears the Union would be ruined by the issue of slavery and the division that it was creating. The issue of sectionalism would see the beginning of the end of the era of good feelings, and the United States would be embroiled from here on in a national debate over the institution of slavery, which will last 40 plus years, and we're still seeing the repercussions of that today. This leads to an increase in sectionalism and away from nationalism. Ultimately, it leads down the path to the American Civil War. Okay. Now, let's talk about McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819. Now, Maryland despised the Bank of the United States and tried to tax it. The president of the Bank of Maryland files a lawsuit. Marshall and the court said that the states could not tax a federal agency. The power to tax is the power to destroy, is a quote in reference to Article 6, Section 2, or the Supremacy Clause. This states that the Constitution and the national governments are supreme. Marshall cites a necessary and proper clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, stating that the Bank of the United States is constitutional. So essentially, the Supreme Court states the Bank of the United States is good and it can't be touched. That is what McCulloch v. Maryland is important to remember about. This establishes the federal government as being more powerful than the states through this ruling. The Monroe Doctrine of 1823, this is drafted by John Quincy Adams. It was a message to Congress which stated that the Western Hemisphere was closed to all foreign intrusion. This is a reference to Russian interest in Alaska and California, and this warns Europeans to stay out of Latin America. Latin America was receiving its independence from Spain during this time. The United States does become the most dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. Now, Gibbons v. Ogden, 1824. Okay, so Manhattan was not connected by bridge but ferry boat. Ogden had a license issued to operate a ferry between New York and New Jersey. He had the monopoly, but Gibbons received a federal license. Okay, so this is an issue related to interstate trade involving more than one state, New Jersey, New York, in this mentioned example. This case stated, Gibbons v. Ogden, that only Congress could regulate interstate trade. Individual states could not regulate interstate commerce. Again, we see the federal government being more powerful than the states. Article 1, Section 8, the Constitution states Congress shall regulate all commerce. Now, let's start talking about the election of 1824 and the sort of the rise of Andrew Jackson, okay? So 4 men run for the office of President of the United States in 1824. Henry Clay, Speaker of the House, he comes in 4th. Now, the 12th Amendment would see the House decide the president. As Speaker of the House, Clay has a lot of influence here, okay? The House decides from the top 3 candidates, which are John Quincy Adams, son of a former president and former Secretary of State, William Crawford, a congressman from Georgia, and General Andrew Jackson, okay? Jackson wins popular vote. And had the most electoral votes, but you had to have 51% of the electoral votes. So the House has to decide in this instance who will be the next president. Jackson, Crawford, and Adams' names go to the House. Crawford dies of a stroke during this time period. Clay said Adams does not represent the common man, but chooses him anyway. Okay. This made Andrew Jackson very angry. Henry Clay was named Adams' Secretary of State, and this had the appearance of corruption, and this is known as the corrupt bargain. Jackson immediately begins politicking for the election of 1828. Now, let's talk about early American political parties. Okay, so From 1792 to 1820, we had the Federalist Party. Okay. Also, simultaneously, the Democratic Republican Party. Okay. And these are the Jeffersonians. And this is from 1792 to 1824. National Republicans, 1825 to 1834. And the Democratic Party, 1828 to present. Now, there's also the Whig Party, 1834 to 1854. And we'll be talking about that as we move forward. Now, John Quincy Adams, he's a member of the National Republican Party. He's the sixth president of the United States, son of a founding father and second president, John Adams. He had traveled to France with his father at the age of 10 to secure aid for the revolution, and he earns a master's degree from Harvard College before starting to practice law. He served as a foreign minister and was Secretary of State under James Monroe. As Secretary of State, he negotiated the purchase of Florida from Spain and also authored the Monroe Doctrine. Famous for his involvement in the Amistad case, which is an excellent film, he was opposed to slavery. Okay, there's this film that came out in 1997 about this case. It's got an all-star cast, Matthew McConaughey. Check it out if you've never seen it. Okay. So he's elected in 1824, and he's only going to serve one term from 1825 to 1829. He's educated, he's sophisticated, but again, he doesn't really reflect the common man in America at this time. He wanted to build a national university, but was opposed in his efforts. And a couple other things to talk about here are Henry Clay's American System and the election of 1828. Okay. Now, the American System, this is in 1824. This is about protective tariffs. Okay. This would protect the United States and manufacturers from foreign competition. Internal improvements, also part of the American System, the building of roads, bridges, canals. And money from protective tariffs could be used to achieve this. So funding. The Bank of the United States, safe loans would be made for paying government debts and controlling inflation. National Republicans and Whigs are for the American system, but Democratic Republicans are opposed. Now, in the election of 1828, Andrew Jackson will square off against John Quincy Adams. Jackson had been campaigning hard, and the election would be dirty. It's a mean slugfest full of propaganda. Jackson said that Adams was immoral, lewd, had been gambling in the White House. He accused him of procuring prostitutes for a Russian duke and a bunch of other crazy stuff. So Jackson wins the election of 1828. And when this happens, strange people begin streaming into Washington by the thousands. 25,000 people went to the White House, nearly destroying it, just to meet Jackson. This becomes infamously known as the inaugural brawl. A couple of incidents that I remember from this is the punch on the White House lawn. It was spiked. Also, people were climbing in through windows to get in the White House, all sorts of other crazy stuff. And we're trying to get to see Andrew Jackson. And he is like pressed up against like a wall or something. And it's an issue. Right. I want to say that he's like almost pressed to death. Like he's not injured, but these people, 25,000, just come to the White House to hang out with the new president, and it gets out of hand. So that is the end of chapter 8 on this lecture. So post any questions you have in the comments. You can send me an email, wilson@uaccm.edu. Thank you.